Scientists have DNA from nearly every population on Earth, except one. Open your phone right now, and you could order a DNA test that traces your ancestry back 60,000 years. Millions of people already have. So has almost every isolated tribe you've ever heard of, and plenty you haven't. Databases at companies like 23andMe and research projects like the National Geographic Genographic Project hold genetic material from more than 7,000 distinct populations, spanning every inhabited continent on the planet. In just the last 2 decades, that data has grown from a handful of research samples to more than 1 million sequenced genomes, cross-referenced against every migration route humans ever walked out of Africa. Picture a world map lighting up, population by population, as each new sample gets logged. Siberia lights up. The Amazon lights up. Papua New Guinea lights up. Then the Kalahari. Then the Arctic Circle. It looks, at this point, like there is nowhere left to reach. Except one. Somewhere in the Bay of Bengal, on an island smaller than Manhattan, ringed by coral reef and thick jungle, that map goes dark. No samples. No swabs. No blood. Not one. But this isn't a story about geography. Reaching that island isn't the hard part anymore. Boats can get there in an afternoon. The hard part is what happens when they try. Every outsider who has landed on that shore in the last 200 years has been driven off, or killed. That's not a sampling problem. That's a refusal. So the real question researchers had to answer wasn't who lives on that island. It was narrower and much harder. How do you reconstruct the genetic history of a population that has never, not once, allowed itself to be measured? The answer wasn't going to come from the island at all. Here's how population genetics actually works. Every strand of DNA carries small, harmless mutations that accumulate at a steady, measurable rate, generation after generation. Geneticists focus especially on 2 lineages: mitochondrial DNA, passed only from mother to child, and Y chromosome DNA, passed only from father to son. Compare those markers across enough populations, and a family tree emerges for the entire species. 2 branches that share more mutations split apart more recently. 2 branches that share almost none split apart tens of thousands of years ago. It's a clock, written in the body, simple in theory, brutally hard in practice, when the population that needs measuring refuses to be found. Since the island itself was off limits, researchers turned to the closest thing available: the tribe's relatives. 3 other groups share the Andaman Islands, and share, almost certainly, a common ancestor: the Ong, the Jarawa, the Great Andamanese. Scientists could reach them, and in the early 2000s, they did. A landmark study, published in the journal Current Biology in 2003, sequenced their mitochondrial DNA for the first time and placed it on the wider human tree. This wasn't the first attempt to understand this population. A British colonial administrator tried direct contact with Andaman tribes back in the 1880s. Disease followed within a year. Entire communities were gone before anyone thought to ask what their DNA might say. Even today, no government agency and no research team is permitted to approach that shore. The law protects the tribe. It also protects, unintentionally, the mystery. To understand what scientists were even looking at, it helps to meet the family. The Great Andamanese were once 10 separate tribes, each with its own language, its own territory, its own name. Today, only a handful of elderly speakers remain, and most of what's left of the tribe has mixed with mainland Indian settlers over generations of contact. The Ong are smaller still, fewer than 150 people, settled on a single reserve, one of the most endangered populations anywhere on the planet. The Jarawa only entered sustained contact with the outside world in the 1990s. Before that, they were exactly as isolated as the island at the center of this story. And there's a detail that puzzled anthropologists for decades. Andamanese people share physical traits with African populations: short stature, dark skin, tightly coiled hair. For a long time, that similarity was treated as a clue about where they came from, but their skulls tell a different story. shaped more like the skulls of Southeast Asians than the skulls of Africans. Two lines of evidence, pointing in two different directions. Zoom out further, and the picture gets stranger. Similar-looking peoples turn up scattered across Asia. The Aida of the Philippines, the Semang of the Malay Peninsula. Same short stature, same dark skin, same tightly coiled hair, thousands of miles apart, separated by ocean and centuries. One people, spread wide by some ancient migration, or four separate populations that simply evolved the same look under the same tropical sun. Before genetics, nobody could say for certain. And then there's the fifth group, the one nobody has profiles for at all. Population estimates range wildly, anywhere from 50 to 200 people, because no census has ever been possible. They are the wild card sitting outside every dataset, the group every comparison in this story ultimately has to explain. Put those two clues together, the dark skin and the ancient isolation, and there's an obvious prediction. If the physical evidence was right, the DNA should point straight back to Africa, showing a direct, unbroken line from the very first humans who walked out of that continent, frozen in place for 60,000 years, while the rest of the world kept moving. That was the expectation going in. Not a guess, a genuinely reasonable hypothesis, built on skin tone, on body shape, on decades of anthropological observation. Every colonial account from the 1800s described them the same way: primitive, ancient, untouched by time. Genetics was supposed to confirm it. Researchers expected a living fossil, a population untouched, unchanged, essentially still living in the deep past. It didn't happen that way. The first branch to fall was the most distant one. Direct African ancestry, tested and ruled out almost immediately. Mitochondrial lineages in living Africans mostly belong to a haplogroup called L. Andamanese mitochondrial DNA doesn't. It belongs to haplogroup M, an Asian lineage, and the paternal Y chromosome DNA belongs to haplogroup D, also Asian. Not African branches, Asian ones. The resemblance in skin and stature wasn't inherited from a shared African ancestor at all. It was convergent evolution, two unrelated populations independently developing the same traits under the same tropical sun, thousands of miles apart. Different causes, same costume. Next came a much newer theory, popular through parts of the 20th century, that the Andamanese arrived recently, within the last 2,000 or 3,000 years, most likely by boat from nearby Southeast Asia. That one didn't survive contact with the molecular clock either. The mutation count on their DNA was far too high for a recent arrival. This wasn't a population that showed up a few thousand years ago. The numbers implied tens of thousands of years of accumulated, isolated mutation. An entire recorded history of India could have happened 4 times over in the gap the mutations described. Recent arrival, eliminated. Then came the theory researchers actually expected to survive, that the Andamanese were an untouched, unchanging remnant, essentially frozen the moment the first humans walked out of Africa, never mixing, never moving, never changing. This is the one the whole story had been building toward, and it fell too. In 2018, a study published in the journal Science compared Ong's genomes against ancient DNA extracted from 8,000-year-old skeletal remains found in Laos and Malaysia, from a Stone Age culture called the Hoabinhian. The match was strong, not to some untouched African lineage, to a broader population of Paleolithic hunter-gatherers who once spread across mainland Southeast Asia. That same ancient population, it turns out, also contributed ancestry to the Jomon people of prehistoric Japan. The Andamanese weren't frozen in Africa. They were one surviving piece of a much larger Asian population that used to be everywhere and mostly isn't anymore. A fourth theory tried to explain the physical resemblance a different way: close kinship with Melanesian and Papua New Guinean populations, who also share dark skin and short stature. Genetically, this one falls apart fast. The lineages diverge early and separately. Similar look, separate story. And the fifth theory, mainland Indian ancestry through historical contact, holds up only for part of the family. The Great Andamanese, the tribe with the longest documented history of forced contact, do show measurable genetic mixing with mainland settlers. The Anj and the Jarawa don't. Whatever contact did to one branch of this family, it left the other branches almost entirely untouched. 5 theories, 5 eliminations. One branch of the tree left standing. What remained, once every alternative had failed, was a single marker, Y chromosome haplogroup D, rare, ancient. Found in the Andamanese, and in almost nowhere else on the planet's Asian mainland. Most of the neighboring populations across South and Southeast Asia don't carry it at all. As the elimination narrowed, the pool of candidates who shared this marker kept shrinking, population by population, until only a handful of names were left on the list. 2 of them stood out immediately, and neither one was anywhere near the Andaman Islands. The Andamanese's closest genetic relatives by this marker aren't in the tropics at all. They're the Ainu, the indigenous people of northern Japan, along with isolated populations in the Tibetan Plateau. Haplogroup D links these 3 groups, separated today by more than 3,000 miles of ocean and mountain, into the same rare, deep branch of the human family tree, not a tribe next door, not a population from the same region. A lineage stretched across the entire eastern edge of Asia, showing up in pockets, thousands of miles apart, and almost nowhere in between. That gap, the empty space between those pockets, is the part worth sitting with. Because haplogroup D doesn't show up in the vast populations of mainland China, or across most of modern Southeast Asia. If the Andamanese, the Ainu, and Tibetan populations all carry a lineage that's missing everywhere in between them, that absence isn't random. It means this lineage used to be there too. It means something else arrived later and replaced it almost everywhere it had been. Somewhere around 10,000 years ago, agriculture began spreading out of what is now China. Farming populations grow faster than hunter-gatherer populations. They spread further, breed faster, and, generation after generation, they absorb or displace whoever came before them. Across most of Asia, that's exactly what happened to the older hunter-gatherer lineages, including haplogroup D. They didn't go extinct exactly. They got diluted, mixed into larger farming populations, generation after generation, until the older signal was buried under the newer one. 3 places, though, escaped that replacement. 2 of them because geography made them nearly impossible to conquer: the mountains of Tibet and the northern islands of Japan, home to the Ainu, who resisted absorption into mainland Japanese culture for centuries. And the 3rd escaped for a different reason entirely. Not mountains, not distance. A tribe that made itself, quite literally, untouchable. The isolation of that island was never really about location. Boats reach it easily. The reef, the jungle, none of that has ever been the real barrier. The real barrier has always been the tribe's own violent, absolute refusal to be approached. A refusal that has held for over 200 documented years, and, if oral tradition is any guide, for a great deal longer than that. And that refusal is exactly why their lineage survived at all. Every other population carrying this same ancient marker got folded into something larger, absorbed by farmers, mixed by conquest, diluted by trade routes and marriage and migration, until the old signal was buried under the new one. The tribe on that island never allowed any of it to happen. No traders. No settlers, no exceptions. Their hostility to outsiders isn't a quirk of temperament or a holdover from a more primitive time, the way 19th century accounts like to frame it. It's the mechanism. It is, quite literally, the reason there's anything left of this lineage to study at all. Everywhere else this ancient population once stood, something newer moved in and took its place. Here, nothing ever got the chance. That same deep isolation left a mark outside the genome entirely. In December 2004, a magnitude 9 earthquake off the coast of Sumatra sent a tsunami through the Indian Ocean that killed close to 230,000 people. Days later, An Indian Coast Guard helicopter flew low over the island to check for survivors. A man stepped out of the tree line, bow drawn, and fired an arrow at the aircraft. The entire tribe, by every account since, survived without help. No rescue teams reached them. None were needed. Anthropologists studying the region believe the tribe reads the ocean itself. Changes in wave pattern, in bird behavior, in the pull of the tide, passed down, generation after generation, long enough to still work when it mattered most. That kind of knowledge doesn't survive in the genome. It survives in memory, told and retold, for longer than most nations have existed. It isn't DNA evidence, but it points at the exact same conclusion the genome pointed at: a population that has occupied one place, without interruption, for a very, very long time. Put a number next to that claim, and the timescale gets almost impossible to hold in your head. Most non-African human lineages branch off the family tree somewhere between 40 and 45,000 years ago. Haplogroup D, the marker connecting this population to the Ainu and to Tibet, is estimated at 50 to 60,000 years old, 10 to 20,000 years older than almost every other branch outside Africa, and the populations carrying it now are almost unimaginably small. The Onge, fewer than 150 people, down from an estimated several thousand 2 centuries ago. The Great Andamanese, 10 distinct tribes, 10 languages, reduced to a single surviving speaker community today. The tribe at the center of this story, somewhere between 50 and 200 people, a range that wide only because no exact count has ever been possible. One of the oldest lineages outside Africa, one of the smallest populations left to carry it. Every one of us carries a version of this same story, written in slightly different ink. Every human alive traces back through the same migration out of Africa, the same slow spread across the same continents. For most of us, that lineage got mixed, diluted by trade, blended by migration, rewritten every few generations by contact with somebody new. That's not a flaw, it's just what happened to almost everyone. On one small island in the Bay of Bengal, it didn't. Not because the island is unreachable, because the people on it decided, and kept deciding, for longer than written history, that it wouldn't be. Every arrow fired at a passing boat, every stranger turned away, all of it, the same choice, made again and again, for tens of thousands of years. Somewhere out there, a database holds genetic information from nearly every population that has ever lived on Earth. One line in that database will always stay blank, and that blank line isn't a gap in the science. It's the last surviving proof of everything the rest of us left behind.